So what we're going to be presenting about today is some of the local food research that we've done together. Specifically looking at how to target audiences in local food context, and then how to take segments that are based on lifestyles and with recommendations of how to target specific messages to promote different sorts of local food products. So just to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about is, first I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about the local food context. Second, we're going to be talking about principles of targeted communication. Third, we're going to talk about a specific lifestyle segmentation that we did in Wisconsin, looking at a statewide poll of Wisconsin residents in terms of their attitudes towards local food, purchasing, behaviors, that kind of thing. And then also show you some work that I've done looking at how to use paid targeted Facebook advertising in order to promote community-supported agricultural shares. So first, when you think about local food, what do some of you think about? When I say, what is local food? What does that mean to you? It's got a couple things, because there's no one right answer.
Community gardens.
Huh?
Community gardens.
Community gardens, that's a great one.
Say farmers markets, CSAs.
Yep. Specific places.
He knows.
Any restaurant that isn't a chain.
Okay, that's another one. What about kind of from a spatial standpoint, not just like a facility, but in terms of like distance or place or that kind of thing? Any ideas come to mind there?
Food miles.
Yeah, food miles, like how far, that's a common one you see at stores sometimes, like 51 food miles away. And then a different one too is sort of that it was grown in the state or in the community that you were raised in. So what we found in our survey was somewhat interesting. So one is 85% of people say that if it's from Wisconsin, it's local, which is kind of interesting because even when we looked at regional differences, say if you lived near Minneapolis, Wisconsin was still more local than was food that might be raised right across the St. Croix River. Second is the one that's 50 miles to a 1 hour drive, which was the shortest distance, but you can see it goes down quite a bit. But basically, Wisconsin, more than anything else, means local, even though you can think about it in terms of spatial terms, but there's kind of like a boundary-based thing that we end up calling Wisconsin tribalism later on, which I'll show you. And why do we care about local food? There's a variety of different reasons why people care about local food. One is that it helps the economy. So a lot of rural areas in Wisconsin and elsewhere aren't doing as well. There's been an increase in larger farmers, but a decrease in mid-sized farmers, but a corresponding increase to some degree in smaller farmers. And those money that's raised in those rural areas recirculates back in those rural economies, and it also brings money into those economies that they otherwise would not have had. From a health standpoint, just eating healthier vegetables. I mean, if you eat more lettuce, spinach, tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchinis, all the different, kohlrabi, all the different kinds of things you can buy local, that it's healthier for you. From an environmental standpoint, the facts of the matter are mixed. That just because something's raised local doesn't mean that it is raised more sustainably. But a lot of the smaller farms do tout either being organic or using sustainable practices. So there's a variety of reasons, environmental reasons, why people might support local food. From a community standpoint, a couple of you mentioned farmers markets, or you could have neighbors sharing food with each other. But there's a community aspect to local food. And then one of the most universal, according to our research, is just food quality, is that if something was picked yesterday, 50 miles away, it's a lot more likely to be fresh and tasty than something shipped from another country 2 weeks ago, right? So there's a genuine quality factor going on as well. So there's also different ways when you think about from a marketing standpoint that you can communicate about local food. Point of purchase signs, social media, radio, TV, signage, outdoor billboards, word of mouth, all kinds of different things. And something special from Wisconsin is one example of a program that's put up by Wisconsin, actually bringing up food miles. These here are showing about how far away was your food raised. And so we were looking at some of these issues about what are the best ways to communicate about local food. Laura, I think this is you, right?
Yeah, thanks, Bret.
Sure.
So, as Bret said, there's all these different ways you could talk about local food with people, and you can imagine maybe some of those messages would be more appropriate for certain types of consumers than others. So I'm going to talk about targeted communication big picture and then what that means in the context of local food. And then after that, I'll share some results from the study we did in Wisconsin. So when we're thinking about targeting communication, we're thinking about having an audience segment that is going to be similar, like people in that segment are similar to each other and different from people in other audience segments. And you want to do this because you want to be able to characterize that audience segment in a way that helps you get the attention of those people and helps you think of messages that really resonate with that group. So you can think about this on different scales. You might think at the largest scale of a mass audience, right? Everybody's in the same segment together. But in terms of messaging, that might not be the best strategy, right? Because some messages are going to work better for certain groups of people than others. And on the other end of the scale, you could think about an individual. What if you could tailor a message to people one-on-one? And that might be really great. So that also takes resources that the kinds of people that Bret and I have worked with in local food don't necessarily have. They don't have the resources to market in that way. So you might pick something more in the middle. You could think, should I target messages to particular demographics, maybe messages for men and women, for example, or people in different parts of the state? You could think about this idea of lifestyle. If you have a group of people that has certain behaviors and attitudes that are similar to each other, can you focus messages that way? Or you may have heard this expression, Publix, before. This would be people who are really active on a particular issue, or have a special interest in something. So thinking about the scale is one part, but you can also think about sort of the strategy you take to define your audience segment. You could, as the researcher, pick something in advance. Like I mentioned, males and females, we're going to look for differences among them. Or you could actually infer groups from your data, which is what this lifestyle stuff is about. So if you have some variables you care about, things that are related to people's lifestyle and food, you can use statistics to form groups of individuals based on that and then look for differences among those groups. So I'm going to give you an example of this predefined groups from some other work Bret and I have done with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So we looked at differences in different kinds of boaters, people who go to lots of different lakes versus people who always stay on the same lake, because that has that's a meaningful difference for the DNR based on risk of spreading invasive species. Or another example with forestry, we looked at differences among people in different parts of the state. So we were saying in advance, are these people different from each other? Which is different than using your data to say who are these groups. So I'm going to talk more about that in a second, but first I'm going to give a little bit more background about this in the context of local food. So some researchers have looked to see, are there demographic differences among local food consumers? And one trend that is consistent is that women show more interest in local food, but when it comes to a lot of other demographic variables, it's very inconsistent. Education, income, ethnicity, there's not like this one local food consumer, and what researchers are saying is, okay, this is actually probably a very diverse group or groups of people. So demographics is not the most actionable way to form messages. And the same is actually true of behavior. There have been studies that would say, I'm going to look at people who are shop at farmers markets versus not markets, or people who are sort of like high, medium, low in terms of local food shopping. And there are some differences there, but really big picture, if local food consumers are a diverse group, if you have a category that's just high local food consumers, that category is still too big. There's different people doing that behavior. So another option is to think about lifestyle, people that have sort of these similar behaviors or attitudes about food. And there's been some research with local food and lifestyle using this framework called the food-related lifestyle, which comes from some European researchers. And their idea was that if you find out some key things about people, about how they cook, how they shop, how they eat, you can use that to sort of categorize people based on that. And they found very consistent results in many European countries where they find these sort of 5 typical groups. Sometimes they find other groups also, but I'll briefly describe them. There's this adventurous group. Got a picture of Anthony Bourdain here. These people cook and shop a lot. They like to try new things. There's a traditional group. For them, the joy in food comes from the familiar. They're going to like to make the same recipes. They're going to like traditional things. There's a rational group, I think food preppers. They enjoy being really organized and practical about food. There's a careless group that is represented here by the waffle burger. They're very spontaneous about their eating and cooking. They might cook sometimes, or not. They might try something new. They're just very whimsical. And then there's this uninvolved group who is represented here by the gray lump of pasta, because food is not their thing. Something else is their thing, but they're not expressing themselves or their values through food. It's something else. So now I'm going to talk more about the results of our study and bring these ideas together. So our research question was, if we segment consumers based on these food-related lifestyle variables, are we going to see differences among those different groups when it comes to the kind of factors that would help us develop targeted messages for them, based on local food, on their communication habits, and demographics? And one other note too, in addition to those food-related lifestyle variables, we also use political ideology to help us form these groups, because knowing something about someone's political ideology can also tell you about the kind of media they might be using or help you target them on social media. So we wanted to make that a segmenting variable to give that variable a little bit more power in terms of actually helping form these clusters. We also had this applied goal, which was to help provide some recommendations for these different groups that we've worked with. There's many different groups promoting local food, and they all have a stake in this research. So in fact, when we developed the survey, we got their feedback from the get-go. So after the survey was developed, we pilot tested it, and then it was a mail survey to Wisconsin households. It went out in the summer of 2015. Just a reminder what those questions were. There were some survey questions that we used to segment the groups, to form those clusters. They had to do with how people cook, shop, eat, why they buy certain things, what qualities they value, and their political ideology. And then once those groups were formed, we looked for differences in terms of where people buy local food, how much they buy, their attitudes about it, communication, and demographics. So to segment the group with those variables related to food-related lifestyle and political ideology, we used a stats technique called K-means. So what this does is you say, okay, based on these variables, I want you to take all the individuals who took the survey and form groups for me, so then everybody gets everybody gets a label basically. You're group 1, you fit in group 2, you're 3, you're 4, you're 5. And then after you have those groups, you can look for differences. And what K-means does is prioritize making people similar within a group, but different from those other groups. The tricky thing is you have to say how many groups to form. So we used 5 groups, but the way we decided that actually was for first getting a visual idea of the data. So think back to that diagram with like the mass audience being like the biggest one. That would be like if our whole audience was in one big group. Or down here with all these little tick marks, this is if everybody's in their own individual group. So we're aiming for something in between, and you can look for this maybe like, here's like 1, 2 groups, or if you look down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have to do a little bit of trial and error and pick the number of groups that is giving you the most interpretable results. And then once you have your groups, you can look for differences based on those other factors that you care about. So before I talk about the groups, a note on demographics. The sample trended a little older than we would have expected for Wisconsin, between 55 and 64 on average. Also a little bit more female, 59%, which may be because we asked for the primary food shopper on the survey to take the survey. Primarily white, which is consistent with Wisconsin demographics. The income and education also match what you would expect for the state. And then we had a really nice spread in terms of political ideology. 40% conservative, 32% moderate, and 28% liberal. So before I talk about local food, I'll just mention the clusters that we saw in the data, and they actually matched fairly well that European characterization. We saw, these are color-coded based on political ideology. This adventurous group who trended liberal, super into cooking and shopping, they like novelty in food, they also like organic food. This rational group that trends conservative, they also really like cooking and shopping, but they have these very practical concerns about it's a convenient location, it's a good price, it's high quality. Then 2 groups that trended moderate, the traditional group, they like cooking and they're a little bit interested in new food. They were the one group that was really not into convenience. So you can imagine this traditional group cooking everything from scratch. And then in contrast, there's this convenience group that doesn't really cook at all. They're super into things being convenient. And this is the group that's a little different than that European characterization. We didn't find that careless group. Instead, we found this convenience-oriented group. And then we found an uninvolved group that's just not interested in food. So when it comes to local food, what we found was that there's at least some interest in local food among all 4 of these groups. So I think what's important to think about there is it's not just who is a local food consumer, but how do all these types of consumers experience and think about local food? Because they're all interested, they just do it differently. This adventurous group buys a lot of local food, goes to the farmer's market, and they have this wide range of beliefs about why local food is good. For them, it's high quality, it's good for the environment, it's healthy, it's good for the economy. All these different things, they think local food has these benefits. They also talk about it more, and they pay more attention to food issues on social media. In contrast, this traditional group, who buys as much local food and goes to the farmer's market as often, they have kind of like tepid beliefs when it comes to what's good about local food. For them, quality is important. They believe local food's high in quality, but all that other stuff about it being good for the environment or the economy, they're not really feeling that. The same is true of this rational group. They buy some local food. They think local food's high in quality, but they're not into those other benefits of it. They also have concerns about where they buy it and how much they spend. They don't want to give it a premium, and they don't go to the farmer's market as much, which makes sense because that's the group with those concerns about a convenient location and a low price. And then this convenience group buys some local food, but remember, they're not cooking. So whatever they're buying has got to be something that they're not really cooking from scratch. Maybe it's apples, or maybe it's a value-added product. And the uninvolved group is, as you'd expect, not very interested. So before I get to some recommendations, I'll just mention a few limitations. This was just focused on Wisconsin. It would be really fun to do this in other states. We focused on the benefits of local food. Later, Bret's going to mention an upcoming project about aquaculture where we can get more into risks and benefits. Local produce is potentially not very risky feeling, but other issues are. And then our sample size was fine for this survey overall, but then once you had people divided into those 5 groups, it would have been nice to have more individuals in each group. So, what we found were these 4 segments that all show some interest in local food, but they're all really different from each other. And thinking about message strategies, this adventurous group, you might want to talk about the environment or quality with them. They really believe both of those things. They're the only group that it would make sense to cross-promote local and organic for. And they also like novelty, so you think about new recipes or trying something new at the farmer's market. The traditional group, it would be different messages for them. Still quality, but they don't want novel food. They want familiar food. They want to know, how do I make my favorite recipe using local ingredients? And then this rational group has some really practical concerns. For them, it's about showing how local food can be convenient and affordable. And Bret's going to talk a little bit later about CSA, but one thing with this sort of way to buy local food is that it could come to your workplace. So for them, there might be particular strategies like that would work really well to make local food a convenient option. And then lastly, with this convenience group, for them, it's probably going to be only specific products that they would want to buy, and it's hard to make recommendations for them based on our data because our data is very focused on produce. So they show some interest, but in terms of what messaging strategy would work for them, we can't really say. And another thing to remember is about the political ideology that these different groups trended differently. The adventurous group was liberal, the traditional moderate, the rational conservative, and this convenience careless group also moderate. So that's helpful to know in terms of reaching these groups, as Bret's going to talk about more with the paid social media ads. And it's also nice to think that maybe this is a point of unification. Even though people feel differently about local food or doing it for different reasons, liberals and conservatives are both into the idea of local food. So a next step would be to test the performance of messages based on the food-related lifestyle, possibly on social media. It's something we're interested in doing. We haven't done that yet, but Bret has done a project with paid social media ads in a different local food context.
Thank you, Laura. So yeah, so one of the areas of study that I've been interested in is doing the formative market research up front and testing what messages should resonate most with different audience members. But as we know, what people say they're going to do isn't what they always end up actually doing. So we had an opportunity with Kristen Runge, and who works for Extension and is actually a graduate student from here, and Aaron Piot to do a series of paid Facebook targeted message tests that I'm going to share with you here. So one, as a reminder, the survey that Laura talked about, there's a statewide survey of local food consumers, is the top reasons they said that they support local food are: 1, it helps local farmers; 2 and 3, it's fresher and tastier; and then 4, it creates more local jobs. So we wanted to build on these message frames as a way to see what prospective CSA customers would find most attractive. Speaking of which, before I go there, who knows what community-supported agriculture is? I know some of you do. Okay, community-supported agricultural, CSA, just if there's anyone who doesn't, that basically a farm sells like memberships or shares into becoming a part of the farm for the coming season. And the idea, it helps the farmer with money when they need it most, which is early on before they are selling anything. And 2, if it's a good season, you get extra. If it's not as good a season, you don't get as much. So you're sort of more connected to the local food system via the CSA model than you might be via other systems. So this Facebook paid advertising field test, for one, we didn't want to pick just like, say, a Madison market. We know that Madison is an island of blue and what's largely a sea of red. So we consciously picked 4 different farms and 4 different parts of the state. Those are very strategically selected to be cities, medium-sized cities, conservative, liberal, different regions of the state, to see how these the averages of these different farms would turn out. And it turns out there's more in common than there were different, but there were differences across the different locations. We were able to put $400 down per farm for a 2-week run. So we ran from basically Valentine's Day last year to the end of the month to look at for the amount of money that we spent. And we tested 4 different messages, which I'll show you in a second. And the gold standard in paid Facebook advertising is you want to get the lowest cost per click. Like, what's the least expensive way for me to reach the audience that I want to reach? So let me show you a couple of examples here. So one is one of the ad message frames, if you will, that we want to focus on was fresh and tasty. That local produce is better, fresher than the alternative. We didn't have to compare it to Big Ag. It kind of just speaks for itself. And it emphasized the belief that local produce is fresher and tastier than non-local produce. I also want you to notice as we go through these ads that all the headlines are basically the same size. Each one of them focuses on a specific farm, but the only thing that really changes on all these ads is just the name of the farm. But we wanted it to be really about the idea across the different 4 farms that we were testing these messages for. Wisconsin grown, I talked to you, what does local mean? Local means Wisconsin. So in the category that we call Wisconsin tribalism, we really focused on that it was grown in the state. And there's been some debate over time of whether this is a radish or a turnip. But this is actually where the farm is located. So it's not only Wisconsin tribal, but it's also local to you, right? And and it also mentions the community we're at. So when we did these advertisements, we just advertised within about a 25-mile radius of the farm. So each one of these was a different area of the state. So social norms are also commonly used in persuasion campaigns, and that is the idea, they're used in a lot of underage drinking campaigns, smoking campaigns, health campaigns, that lots of people are doing this good thing, or that people don't approve of doing this thing, so stop doing it. So one of the social norms messages we had was join your community, that lots of other people are signing up for CSA. Interestingly, we have started to invest in photo banks because we found that clip art almost always contains a very kind of bourgeois sort of aesthetic where everybody looks like models. So I'm doing lots of work in like forestry and fish and food, and we're starting to just, we literally can't find normal looking people. Well, I mean, someone, myself included, right? I could shake off the winter 15 or 10 or whatever it is, but everybody looks like just a little too polished. But it also brings up some interesting diversity issues too, because let's use Akanto. It's pretty white up there, whereas in Milwaukee is a more diverse community. So we actually did alter these ads depending on the norms of the community itself. But we thought a lot about it, tried hard. I'm not sure we nailed it, but we were very conscientious about what we did try to do. And then the fourth one was, you saw that helping local farmers was also one of the top reasons. It was actually the number one reason. And so we created a category called Farmer Personified. And that is where you get to emphasize the personal connection between the consumer and the farmer. So these folks from Akanto, apparently I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, so not a big agricultural background, but apparently this red tractor is very nostalgic to people from agricultural areas. And they just look like normal folks, and they are normal folks. But each farm was different, but each of the headlines said the same thing: our farm to your table. And just emphasize, I'm connecting you to a real person that's producing your food, okay? So when we look at the cost per click-through, again, the more people that I have to show your ad to, the more, in order to get the same amount of engagements, the more I'm going to charge you. So the more efficient the ad is, the fewer people Facebook needs to show it to, the lower your cost per click-through. So if you look at this data here, the number one performing ad was 89 cents per person, and the action we asked them to do is to go through to the web page. So to go to the farmer's web page, and that was a requirement of participating in the studies. They had to have an active web page and an active Facebook presence that we could build off of. And they basically gave us administrator privileges for a couple of weeks while we conducted this study. Coming in number two was Wisconsin Tribalism, Wisconsin Grown, and then the social norms and product-centric ad, Fresh and Tasty, really performed the worst. But one of the interesting things from this, this is basically an applied message framing study, but I think the natural inclination of a lot of farmers would be like, hey, I want people to see my beautiful products, and this is about my vegetables, this is about what I'm producing. Well, this would actually suggest the opposite, right? And one of our theories, and we can't prove this, is that if I want to get fresh and local tasty produce, I can go to the co-op, I can go to Hy-Vee, I can go to Metcalfe's, I can go to a farmer's market, I can grow in my yard. So like, if I'm going to connect with the CSA, the reason that I'm connecting with them is to feel like I'm more connected to my local food system, because I can get those other things via other means, if that makes sense. So the total click-through is sort of echoes the cost per click-through metrics. That is, the most click-throughs went to the farmer personified ad, second most to the Wisconsin Tribalism, third to social norms, then fourth to fresh and tasty. So again, you could quibble about whether we might have designed these ads different, but again, I want you to note that they're not perfect. In the new ads I'm doing right now, we try and make every element as equivalent as possible, just so that we're not adding design variables as a confounding variable. This was the first time that I ever did this study, and I think it actually turned out pretty well, and we got some good compliments from people that work in industry. That some of the numbers we got were pretty impressive for people going about this the first time. Now we're doing this in aquatic invasive species, urban forestry, in a variety of different contexts to see what message frames work in different contexts. And the top performing ads, as I said before, was this Farmer Personified and Wisconsin Grown. I mean, both of these are pretty easy ads to make, right? I mean, these were made on PowerPoint. You go take a picture of you and your family, or you just take a picture of a map and say grown in Wisconsin, right? So we've given versions of this talk collectively to quite a few farmers now, and these are relatively easy ideas to emulate. And we actually had a workshop about a month or two ago where Kristen and I actually trained a group of farmers how to implement these ads in their own practice. So it wasn't just like, hey, Facebook can be really helpful, but we spent 3.5 hours with them and had them go through the process of uploading the data, dropping down some money, putting in their credit cards, and being able to pull the trigger and actually implement our top performing ads. So these are all the farmer personified ads. This is the one that I kept showing you, but this was a nice family also that participated from Custer, Brooklyn. This was our kind of Madison representative. And then there was a school to garden program in Milwaukee. So these were the 4 different farms that we used. So some of the next directions we're taking, like I said, I'm actually doing this very soon in the aquatic invasive species. We're spending a lot of time trying to get urban residents to call an arborist, trying different message frames on Facebook. But one of the things that we're excited about related to local food is we just got a fairly substantial grant from Sea Grant. If you're familiar with that, fund projects to support the coastal states and the Great Lakes states, and one of their priority areas is aquaculture, or raising the capacity of farm-raised fish. Now, one of the things that's interesting for Laura and I and the rest of our team is that there's not really an anti-local produce camp per se. Like if you're casting your local produce in terms of like GMOs or, you know, big ag is killing us or that kind of thing, but we're not really doing that. We're just saying what's good about local food. But aquaculture does have more trade-offs in terms of nutrient runoffs in the water. Anytime you have an animal, you have manure or feces, which is a source of contamination to waterways. There's issues with antibiotics. There's issues about animal species getting out of their enclosed pen and breeding with wild populations. So it's a little bit more controversial, which we also think will make it more of an interesting research subject. Here there's a group that we've been collaborating with called, from Wisconsin Sea Grant that already exists, called Eat Wisconsin Fish. So we'll be helping them to kind of get the word out about farm-raised fish. So again, looking at aquaculture, right now our fisheries are vastly overfished. Like, I mean, some of them have crashed to as low as 10%. Current wild-caught system is just not viable for the long term. But I'll tell you what's an interesting thing. Go talk to your average liberal, like, hey, what kind of fish will you eat? They're like, oh, wild-caught only. But imagine if you turn that around for pigs. Like, I'll only eat, you know, pigs or chicken or cows if they're wildly caught in the forest or something like that. It wouldn't happen. So we're trying to like look at that sort of paradox about why is it that you only take wild caught, but you won't eat sort of pond-raised fish or tank-raised fish. Because if, no offense to meat eaters in the family, but there's nothing.
Do you have data about that people would say that? Because, you know,
Data
I
about
think it's
what?
not true. You have data about that assertion?
About-
Because about millenniums, I think they're totally aware that the fisheries are, you know, depleted and so on.
I don't have data, but I do know, I have anecdotally, good
Okay.
point. So qualitative, ethnographic,
So,
anecdotal
yeah.
data would
So don't
suggest.
make, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, I don't want to overstretch that conclusion,
Yeah.
so point well taken. But I have heard quite a number of people say, just like, oh, only wild caught, I won't touch it. So we need to get more data in order to support that assertion. This is another example of aquaculture where Atlantic Salmon Farm was, you know, before it collapsed, where 160,000 fish get out and are start breeding with other salmon breeds. So this is sort of where we've been taking the research next. So right now we're in the process of collecting the data about what consumers and fish farmers think, and then our next step in year 2 will be to do different Facebook-related messages in order to see what's most effective at getting people more interested in learning about farm-raised fish. So I think that we might have ended this a little early, Dave, is it?
That's good.
Yeah, well, 12:40. So yeah, so I guess I'd welcome any questions. We've been learning a lot about Facebook advertising, a lot about fish, we know a heck of a lot about produce. So if anyone has any questions or comments, we welcome those at this time.
Thank you, Bret.